Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. President Biden says the United States is about to reach its goal of delivering 200 million coronavirus vaccine shots in the first 100 days of his presidency. By Thursday, Mr. Biden said 80% of the over 65s will have had at least one jab. But he warned there was still a long way to go. He said some younger people were not getting vaccinated because they couldn't afford to miss work.
Now is the time for everyone over 16 years of age to get vaccinated. Unlike the target groups where we've made such great progress, the broad swath of American adults still remain largely unvaccinated. In a number of states, they weren't eligible for the vaccination until this week. Too many younger Americans may still think they don't need to get vaccinated.
Argentina's health minister says the country is going through the worst period of the pandemic since the first cases were reported there just over a year ago. The minister, Carla Vizzotti, said the public health system was facing the prospect of collapse because of a sharp rise in infections in the past 2 months. More than 60,000 people have died of COVID-19 in Argentina. Russian police are reported to have arrested almost 1,500 supporters of the jailed opposition activist Alexei Navalny on a day of protests across the country. The demonstrators had demanded that Mr. Navalny, who's been on hunger strike for 3 weeks, be released or given access to better medical care. Turnout was below that of similar protests earlier this year. Sarah Rensford is in Moscow.
In St. Petersburg, almost 500 people were arrested today, where police were using electric shock machines and quite some brutality against protesters. Here in Moscow, we saw very different scenes today, very unusual for Russia, in fact, which is the police, they're in fairly big numbers, but basically standing back and letting people chant and march through the streets, really let off steam, if you like, which seemed to work because there were no big clashes.
A car bomb has killed 4 people at a hotel in the Pakistani city of Quetta, where the Chinese ambassador has been staying. Security officials suspect the diplomat was the intended target, but he wasn't in the hotel at the time. It's not clear who was behind the attack. Militants have opposed Chinese infrastructure projects in the area. Secunda Kamani has more details.
Balochistan, the province where this took place, where Quetta is situated, has been home to a long-running separatist insurgency, but it's also seen attacks by Islamist groups like the Islamic State group and the Pakistani Taliban. Overall, the number of attacks by militant groups in Pakistan has really decreased very dramatically in recent years, but there has been this uptick in violence in recent months, particularly along the border with Afghanistan.
Secunda Kamani reporting. You're listening to The World News from the BBC. Police in Brazil have arrested one of the world's biggest arms traffickers. João Filipe Barbieri had been on the run since last year. Leonardo Rocha reports.
Barbieri was captured at his mother's house on the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. He was previously convicted and jailed as one of the leaders of a gang that smuggled more than 1,000 rifles from the United States and sold them to drug traffickers in Rio. The gang was caught 3 years ago when a container it had dispatched from Miami was intercepted at Rio's International Airport. It contained hundreds of weapons hidden inside equipment to heat swimming pools. Barbieri escaped from a high-security prison in Rio in November using fake court documents that appeared to order his release.
A black man has been shot dead by police in the U.S. state of North Carolina. An investigation has been opened into the killing of Andrew Brown. Local media said he'd been trying to flee in his car from police acting on a warrant for his arrest. He died a day after a white policeman in Minneapolis was convicted of the murder of George Floyd. The Justice Department has announced a federal investigation into the city's police department. Italian media say a man has been arrested in connection with the Islamist militant attack 5 years ago in the French city of Nice, which killed 86 people. The Albanian national is suspected of having supplied weapons to the attacker, who was shot dead at the scene. He'd driven a truck into crowds celebrating the Bastille Day holiday. The United States has removed restrictions on drone flights in a key step towards their use for commercial deliveries. They'll now be able to fly over people on the ground without first gaining permission from the authorities. They'll also be permitted to fly at night in most circumstances. That's the latest. BBC News.